You're listening to the SoCal Property Playbook. I'm your host, Tyler Collins, and today we're joined by Maddy McGarry, who started her real estate investing career at the young age of 23. So Maddy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and super excited to kick off your podcast series. First episode, so no
First
pressure.
episode. No pressure. No pressure. We're just here to have fun and talk about making money in real estate. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Maddy.
Yeah, so I'm Maddy McGarry. I actually just moved to San Diego about 6 months ago, but originally from the Midwest. So I grew up in Iowa, but I actually moved every year of my life. So I had a pretty transient childhood, ended up living in 4 different states, which was super interesting. I mean, from a real estate standpoint, I got to see a lot of different housing markets, but...
So as a kid, you were tracking the prices in different...
Yeah, honestly, from a pretty young age. So I actually got to watch my parents buy and sell a number of different properties, which was super interesting. And never really thought about real estate as a career path for myself, but I think it was sort of subconsciously in the back of my mind that it might be something to pursue someday. And ended up learning quite a bit from the experts through my mom and dad, which was really nice. So,
well, that's great. Very cool. Awesome. So you moved around to a couple of different states. So how do you eventually, so you say you're from Iowa, right? And so you went to school out there, correct?
I did. Yes. I went to Iowa State. Actually graduated high school early. So I went to Ames High School, and Ames is a smaller town just north of Des Moines. So Iowa State's a Big 12 school, went there and I studied agricultural communications, which sounds pretty niche, but actually gave me a lot of flexibility to take a number of different classes across a lot of different disciplines, which I really liked. But even though I was pretty nomadic and spent time in a lot of different places, I feel like the Midwest was always home to me. And that's actually where I ended up buying my house, which is what we'll talk about later on.
Awesome. Well, okay, so you studied agricultural communication, but you did a couple of things first before you started getting involved in real estate. So this is kind of lay it out for me here. You're just graduating college, and what are you doing next?
So I actually graduated during COVID in March of 2020. I had just turned 21, and basically 2 weeks after my birthday is when the whole
So that
world
was a
shut
really
down.
fun. Oh, at least you had your 21st before the shutdown.
I did, yeah. I barely squeezed it in. But so it was interesting because I basically had to scout for jobs remotely, but also never really had a graduation ceremony. So it kind of felt like my transition to the real world was sort of accelerated because I didn't really get that transition period where I could celebrate my achievements. I kind of just had to ram through like a lot of people were also in a position to having to do. But I was pretty heart set on working in DC. So I actually had a friend who was already working on Capitol Hill, and she saw that there was an opening for an Iowa senator. And my goal was to basically work for a home state senator, kind of regardless of party, just to get the experience and also understand kind of how the constituency works in my home state and sort of see the mechanism behind the legislation sort of process. And so I ended up applying for the job, submitted my resume, did a phone interview, all very quickly. And this was, during COVID when nobody was leaving their house,
This is
basically.
like the beginning of COVID.
It was. Yeah, it was basically April when
my
this was all
gosh.
happening.
Wow.
So by
you graduated in...
I graduated in May and sort of
Okay.
started scouting a month before graduating, but also knowing that there was a lot of uncertainty because I
gosh.
had no idea, am I going to be able to move at all? Am I going to have to do something remotely? But
Oh, wow.
I really just had to err on the assumption that I would just continue the course with my goals and try and get to DC if I could. So I ended up doing the interview process, and about a week after getting accepted, I moved to an apartment in DC. I ended up living in Arlington, actually. It was a lot more affordable, a lot more spacious, and really didn't have a lot of time to do research on housing. I just had to go on Facebook Marketplace and go through word of mouth referrals to see where I could end up living, which was pretty anxious. I mean, obviously moving from the Midwest to DC without even seeing the property in person.
And you'd
is
never
really
been
risky.
to Arlington or DC or...
I did some internships there, but I didn't
Okay.
really, I wasn't on the ground to actually see where
You
exactly
didn't
I
know,
wanted to
you hadn't
live.
seen the street you're going to be leasing a place
and I
at.
didn't even at the time, I didn't even get a Zoom tour or anything
You didn't get a
virtual.
Zoom tour even?
It was all photos. Yeah.
It was all photos.
Yeah.
I hope those were...
Which was risky, but I actually ended up living with 3 other girls that were my age, and they also kind
You're
of
making gambles even before you got into real estate.
Yeah. They kind of had to do the same process where it was sort of just doing a coin flip, essentially. Like, is this going to work? But it sort of mitigated the risk because I knew I was going into it and it wasn't just me. And I knew that, the price that I was paying for the unit was within my means. So even if it wasn't the ideal situation, I knew I could do it for at least 6 months. And at that point, since it was the height of the pandemic, I didn't even know if I would end up staying there that long. So it was interesting. But I ended up staying there for 2 years. So
Okay, so you did end up staying for 2 years.
I did, yeah.
And was it that at that Iowa politician's office for those 2 years?
I did. So I was a deputy press secretary. So basically working in the communication shop for the senator. And there were 3 other people that also were part of the team.
Got it.
But the interesting thing about DC is a lot of people think that they're obviously highly coveted jobs, but you actually don't get paid very much at all. And DC, I think, is still in the top 10 in terms of most expensive places to live.
I think it was number 1 at one point.
It was.
Yeah.
It was definitely in the top 3 for sure. Not just
Yeah.
with rent, but obviously home buying as well.
Yep.
And it's interesting because a lot of the starting salaries for Capitol Hill jobs and even nonprofits can be in the 30 grand to 40 grand range,
Yeah.
which is pretty crazy.
It's almost like, well, it's less than California minimum wage even.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, my rent, I was living with 3 people, and I think it was still over $1,000 a month. And I wasn't even living that close to my work. I had to do public transit, and I didn't have a car either. But DC is actually pretty accessible. It's actually more of a burden, I think, to have a car because you have to pay for parking, and, it's dangerous. There's a lot of break-ins. Probably not right now with how things have sort of evolved, but during COVID, it was kind of an epidemic for a while. That was a big issue. So,
Yeah. Wow. So you did that. Okay. So you were in DC for 2 years, and then tell me, so how did eventually, what was your path after that?
So I guess just to back up, like to give more of an idea of what I did on a daily basis, working in the Senate was, probably the most fast-paced job I had. And obviously I've already mentioned you don't really make a lot of money, but in some cases the hours are super grueling. In some cases, I was working 12 to 15-hour days, and the senator might have a TV interview on CNN or Fox
So that's
News.
your in office, like 12 to 15 hours.
Yeah, exactly. Or on the road, going around to different meetings, or sometimes she'd have an interview with somebody, a constituent in the office, and then we'd have to run and go do votes, and then she'd have a reception somewhere in downtown DC. But there were a lot of times where I'd be in the news studio for a national brand at 10 o'clock at night, sort of tying up talking points and getting her ready to go on TV, which was super high pressure.
Oh,
but
so you have to be there because you're one of the press people, and you have to prep her for all these things she's doing.
Right. Basically staffing them, not to
my
imply
gosh.
that they can't do it on their own, but it's just a lot easier. So
That's what they pay you for.
Right, exactly. But you don't get paid overtime because, even if I was working super late or a vote went until 2 a.m., you don't really get compensated extra. It's obviously salary based, but, I think it really equipped me to have poise under pressure and really understand how to work in super difficult environments, but also meeting, actually tight deadlines. In other jobs, you don't necessarily get to experience that. Even if you're working for a PR agency that's super fast paced and, high caliber, you don't necessarily get it until you're sort of in the bowels of DC and understanding how all of that works. So
in 2023, you were the Cherry Blossom Queen. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So I actually got involved in that, I would say fairly inadvertently, hadn't really planned on it. It was sort of something that I did spontaneously. But the way I got involved is I joined what's called the Cherry Blossom Leadership Program. And it's held in DC every year for the past 75 years.
So what is the Cherry Blossom Leadership Program?
Yeah, so you're probably familiar with the cherry blossom trees that are in DC. You've probably seen them around the tidal basin.
Yeah.
At this point, they've sort of crept into downtown DC, and you can basically see them anywhere, even along the National Mall, which is really nice, by the Lincoln Memorial. But back in 1912, Japan actually donated, I think it was 3,000 cherry blossom trees to the United States, really just as a symbolic token of friendship. And for people that don't know, the cherry blossom actually symbolizes renewal and vitality and also friendship. So it was sort of a diplomatic gesture from Japan, and this was obviously long before World War II, and we had, a pretty strong relationship, which we've obviously remediated since then. So that was when sort of things started, but then in 1935, they started doing the Cherry Blossom Festival. So they'd have a parade that basically went through Pennsylvania Avenue along the National Mall. And it was sort of a way to celebrate the longevity of the donation. And it kind of happens every year. And I think something like 2 million people come to DC every year just to see the cherry blossoms, which is pretty incredible.
Wow.
And then in 1948 is when they started what's called the Cherry Blossom Leadership Program.
Okay.
And it sort of has the aesthetic of a pageant, maybe like a beauty
I
contest.
was going to say, it reminds me of like a pageant. Like there's the Rose Queen for the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And, we wear sashes. There's a coronation at the end.
So you get your sash?
Yeah, it has sort of the optics of a pageant.
Okay.
But it's not. It's actually, so the way that you get involved is what's called your state society actually selects a delegate to represent all 50 states and the U.S. territories, the 5 that we have. And so you're fully vetted based on your professional background, academic achievements, maybe community involvement, things like that. So everyone is fully vetted that gets into the program. And then we usually have a Zoom meeting or a phone call kind of leading up to when we go out to D.C. And then we end up spending about a week in DC doing a lot of professional development activities. There's a lot of networking events. We've even visited government agencies. There's usually also a reception at the Japan ambassador's residence, which is really cool. I actually saw a couple Supreme Court justices that were invited to the event. And so you're just rubbing elbows with all these really, high caliber, powerful people. And so we do that throughout the week. We also do some community service and volunteering. And then at the end of the week, they hold what's called a grand ball.
The grand ball.
And what they do is they have this wheel. It looks like the Wheel of Fortune from the actual show, except it's standing upright, essentially. And they have a sliver on the wheel for each. Instead of a dollar value, it's for all 50 states in the U.S. territories.
Oh, yeah.
And then they spin it. Usually someone from the ambassador's office will come and do it. That's the tradition. And they all have their kind of special way of spinning it, but usually 3 or 4 times, and then they just let it roll. And whatever state it lands on gets to be the queen. So the long-standing tradition is that it's completely random and that everyone who's in the program is sort of equally qualified and on equal footing. So everyone should sort of have a chance. And before I was crowned, there was actually a girl standing next to me. I think she was the delegate from Montana. And she said, "Oh, I think you're going to get picked." And I'm like, what the heck? I'm not going to get picked. I mean, it's like playing the lottery. I have no inclination. But at the same time, sometimes you just know when something good is going to happen. It's sort of a gut feeling or an instinct. And it's kind of like I saw it unfold in slow motion when I actually got picked. And it's funny because when the wheel was starting to stop, I thought it was going to stop at a different state, and then it decided to just go one more notch.
Oh, it did like a little
landing.
Click,
it did a little
click,
bit
click,
of a
click.
False alarm moment.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just so special. So that was the DC portion.
Yeah, that never goes well for me when I play roulette, but...
Yeah, I bet. Sort of a similar
Wish
concept.
I had that luck.
But so that was the DC portion. And then, so that was in April. And then in June, the tradition is that the queen gets to go to Japan for 2 weeks. And I'd actually been the first to go since COVID. So I think there'd been maybe a 4-year hiatus.
So this was in 2023, you said this happened, right?
Yeah, this was in June. So when you go to Japan, you fly first class on ANA Airlines. You are basically treated as a VIP guest everywhere you go. And I think people in the United States think the Cherry Blossom Queen concept is cool, but in Japan, it's actually highly reverent. And it's a super sacred symbol, and you have to treat it with a lot of decorum and respect, probably to more of an extent than you would here. And so anyway, you get to Japan. I think I landed about 4 p.m. on my first day, but I really wasn't able to sleep on the plane. So I didn't have much time to adjust to the jet lag. But I think the next day I had already started meeting with foreign dignitaries and pretty official people in Japan. I started in Tokyo, and my first day I met with the Speaker of the House of Representatives of Japan, and they have basically a welcoming reception.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the point where I get to meet the Japan Cherry Blossom Queen. So we're sort of converging in Tokyo
Oh,
is
I
when we
see.
start.
So each nation has their own queen, and they kind of.
So I know Denmark does. Japan was the first one to do it. And then
Okay.
I think maybe one or two other countries, but it's actually not something that everyone has, which
Yeah.
makes it even more special and
Yeah.
super interesting and sacred. But I also got to meet the Prime Minister. It was mostly a photo op, I guess, but we also exchanged gifts. And basically I'd have, 8 to 10 engagements a day. Anything
Wow.
from I got to meet Rahm Emanuel, who was
So
the,
you had been the one helping politicians get to their engagements, but for this,
Right.
the Cherry Blossom Queen, now you were the star.
Yeah, there
getting
was like the
shuttled
shoes on
around.
the other foot, and it was so cool. I mean, such a contrast, but it was actually like a real world experience in diplomacy to some extent. I mean, some people might think that sounds cheesy, but you really do feel like it. I think if you take it seriously, which is what certainly the people in Japan expect, because you are representing the entire nation essentially, which it's a lot of pressure, and I don't think I even realized the magnitude of what that was going to be like until I got there. But it was really neat. I actually got to meet the mayor of Tokyo. I went to Shizuoka, which is where Mount Fuji is, actually. And I met the governor there. And from his office, you can actually see Mount Fuji in the distance. It's pretty far, so I didn't go, all the way to the base of it. But I also went to a prefecture, which is basically their equivalent of a state in Japan. We obviously helped design their government after World War II, but in Issei, there's no one speaking English. Like, you're totally in a remote coastal region of Japan, and it's a lot more sparsely populated. But when I was there, I actually went to a school, and I ended up speaking to over 1,000 people and didn't really know until I walked
Oh,
in.
wow.
And so basically the format...
So how do you with public speaking? What's that?
It used to terrify me, and I feel like this experience was sort of sink or swim, kind of got thrown into the deep end, and I got really desensitized of the pressure and the stress of it.
They're just like, you're speaking here.
Yeah. And, when I was with the Prime Minister, I walked out of the room and there was a whole press gaggle. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know, I was going to be taking questions and being on camera. And it ended up being great. I mean, that's another thing is I got pretty good at thinking quickly on my feet and sort of, having an even tempered disposition under pressure, even when you don't know what's going to happen. And obviously that's, I think, a pretty core thing that you need to exercise in real estate because it's super unpredictable. And when you're representing people that are making one of the biggest financial decisions of their life, they want someone that's not highly anxious and emotionally driven. They want someone who can sort of be a little bit more poised. And I think that also builds trust too. So that was actually a really good experience for me to sort of build that skill set. And I had no idea that I'd be sitting here today, referencing it and giving it the credit that I am now and sort of connecting it to real estate in some way.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So you're doing all this. You have your job in the press department of this Iowa politician. You're doing the Cherry Blossom Queen stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find time in the midst of all of this? Now you started buying real estate, right?
Yeah, I did.
So how?
I bought my first property in, I think it was 2021, fall of 2021. So basically,
this is in the days of the good interest rates. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they were over double what we saw in COVID. I think in COVID it was 2 to 3%. My interest rate was 4.8.
Yeah, they're
so
just picking
they were
up.
starting to really pick up.
Yep.
But basically, I started to transition out of DC. Before I actually physically left Capitol Hill, I started a job with a company called Barn Tools. And they're an ag technology company, sort of similar to the Nest thermostat that you would have in your home.
Okay, got it.
And basically, it allows farmers to monitor barn conditions like temperature, if the power's working, if their feed bins are full from their smartphone. Super innovative. And I think when a lot of startups are coming up with a product, sometimes they think they have a cool idea, but it doesn't necessarily fill a need. And what they did is they actually started to basically replace all the archaic farm monitoring systems that had to use a landline or maybe like relied on internet.
I thought you were going to say like the line on the trough. The food is below the line on the trough. I was like, that's pretty.
Yeah.
That's a system, I guess.
I mean, it's sort of similar, but anyway, you don't always know how a startup is going to go. And it was definitely a risk to go from something so established, which is, the institution of the U.S. government, to a startup that has 20 or 30 people, probably not even at that point. But they basically needed someone to build their content library. And I had the flexibility since we were still kind of post-COVID of doing it remotely. So I started the job probably 2 months before I left DC just to finish out my lease. And, I had a lot of friends there, so I didn't want to just abruptly leave. But, I started sort of weighing my options for housing. I knew that rent would probably be more flexible and easier, but
And
obviously...
so this job at Barn Tools, this is in Iowa?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
It's based in Des Moines. But
Okay.
a lot of the team's actually remote, which is
I feel
nice,
like that was
so-
a safe bet to assume that Barn Tools was based in Iowa.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. This is not in DC.
No, definitely not. So that's why I was able to still kind of finish out my time before moving to Iowa. But
Got it.
That's where all my family is. So I thought, well, this is actually a good opportunity to get back and be close to my loved ones for a while. But, I was really interested in starting to maybe diversify my investment portfolio a little bit more and get a good springboard to start building wealth at a much faster rate than just, conventional index funds and ETFs and things like that. So, I started to put pencil to paper, and rent just didn't even make sense, even in Iowa, which is one of the lower cost of living states. I mean, I could basically own a home for under $1,000 a month, whereas rent would have been $1,500 plus.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about rent is that it might give you the flexibility, and it's a little bit more hands off if you don't want to manage a property, but rent always goes up every year. You can always count on that.
Yep.
But if you finance properly, your payment every month is going to be fixed for 15 to 30 years.
Yep.
So I started scoping out properties. I started in Ames, which is where I went to college, Ames, Iowa. And, it's by a Big 12 university. It's a great place to raise a family. Pretty marketable place for sure, but also a little bit more expensive. So I started by looking for places there, but then ended up drawing a 30-minute radius around Ames and kind of the Des Moines area to see what my other contenders would be that were probably going to be a little bit less. But my goal was to kind of find the worst looking house with the greatest potential in the best neighborhood, which is kind of a good baseline to start with.
Wow.
And I also said that I didn't want to spend more than 25% of my income on housing, which is a good rule of thumb to follow.
So
whether
you're
renting or
23
buying,
and
but
you're thinking about all this.
I'm trying. Yeah. I mean, you have to start early, just like
So
a
how
401k.
did you, I mean, most people who are 23 don't think about like, oh, I need to spend 25% of my income or less on mortgage or rent. And, oh, I need to, what do you call it? There's the neighborhood effect where if you have a bad house in a good neighborhood, that actually increases the value.
Right.
Like most 23-year-olds are thinking about like, I want to go to the bar and get something to drink. And, oh, this is a cute guy or girl.
Yeah.
So was that family upbringing or what? How did you,
I think so. I mean, I've always been super independent and autonomous and like to kind of solve problems on my own accord. But like I talked about, I moved every year of my life. So I pretty much saw my parents go through the entire life cycle of not just buying a home, but turning around and selling it again. They got pretty good at flipping houses and always pretty consistently making good revenue in those
There was
choices.
probably a lot of
And
discussion in the house, right? Too
Yeah,
about like, oh,
definitely.
how much are we gonna get out of this? And like,
yeah, I had a lot of exposure to
Oh,
it. So I
yeah.
definitely credit them with sort of equipping me with the, I guess, minimum amount of business acumen to kind of know where to start. But I think ultimately it's up to you on how you want to spend your money. And when I started assessing the rent options, I'm just like, this makes no sense. I mean, it's not just cases where you're paying your landlord's mortgage, but you're, paying $1,500, $2,000 a month for money you're never going to see again. And I also kind of like the idea of having my own yard and having my own property. I mean, the house that I ended up buying is between 1/4 and 1/2 an acre. So I have a ton of room. It's super spread out and you don't deal with noise complaints and things like that, which is super nice. So I ended up finding a house in a town called Jewell, Iowa. It's super small, but it's about 20 minutes from Iowa State. And that was one of the factors that I considered is there's obviously negative elements that can bring down the value of a home and also positive, but you really have to think about the things that you can't change. So with the house that I found,
that's
I
the
knew,
most important.
Yeah.
If you're
things-
buying a property, that property exists in that place, so you can't change the neighborhood conditions.
Right.
If it's a good neighborhood or a bad neighborhood, doesn't matter how much you renovate that kitchen. You're stuck with that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Or if you live under a flight path or, outside of a busy
Oh, that's a big
intersection.
thing here in North County, the
Yeah.
flight paths. That's, oh my gosh.
Big complaint, big point of
Yeah.
contention for sure. But For me, I sort of had the positive stuff on my side. So not only was I in driving distance to Iowa State, but I also was a block away from the high school, the middle school and the elementary school, and also the swimming pool and all the recreational things in town. So
Let me guess, you check the school districts that they were good schools?
I mean, it's kind of the only option in that part of Iowa, but it's kind of cool because all the small towns that are so small they don't even have a gas station or a
Oh,
store
so they
have to
feed
go
into
to
that.
there.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So it's sort of a hub in some sense, but mainly I liked the fact that a lot of people in Jewel actually live in town, but they still commute to Iowa State, whether they're a student or they're a professor. I met a couple people that are in that boat too. So I knew that it wasn't too far because it was still in striking distance of a Big 12 school, which was certainly valuable. And there's also some new development starting to go up on the north side of town, which eventually could get close to kind of connecting toward Ames, which is where Iowa State is. So I really knew that those factors were on my side, but at the end of the day, the house itself was really solid. It was a huge eyesore. It needed a huge facelift, but
So
there
you
was
did, you
nothing-
bought the kind of
ugly-
fixer-up house in the
Yeah.
good neighborhood.
Yep. It was like a forest green color, but the paint was so bad that you could see through to the white, which was the original color of the
boy.
house. And I didn't even know that. I'm like, wow, that's so weird. The paint looks like it's transparent. And I was able to find old pictures of the house online and found out that it used to be white. It was built in, I think, 1949. So it'd been through a few life cycles,
Couple
and
of
phases,
things.
but
Yeah.
I followed through and said, yep, I found the ugliest house. Now I have to fix it. And so that
So
was where
one
it
of the things in
started.
real estate is you make your money when you buy the house. It's a quote by Ben Mala, actually, for anyone who follows Ben Mala.
Mm-hmm.
So the price you pay is the most important factor in determining the value you're going to get out, because you can only raise the value so much, and the value you sell it for is subject to market conditions.
Yeah.
So if you can buy a place, let's say there's a seller that needs to get out of there quick, or it's a very unattractive property, with fading green paint.
Yeah.
So how do you negotiate that? What was like the list price versus what you got? You don't have to say the amount,
Sure.
but just
So one thing that was working in my advantage is that the house, I think, had been on the market for close to 2 months, which in the Midwest, the housing market is very seasonal. So basically the time to sell and buy is during the summer because that's when inventory really spikes.
Yep.
And also sellers are in sort of the driver's seat because there's a lot more competition. So they, in some cases, in fact, in many cases, you're bidding up the price and getting offers higher than, asking price.
Yep.
So one thing I did, I actually didn't take much off the value when I put in my offer, but I did have a contingency. So basically in exchange for paying close to full price, I asked them to take care of a couple of issues with the property. And the main thing
So you had
was,
to request for repairs.
I did.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it was an expensive lift. So there were actually 3 trees on the property that were probably over 100 years old. And there's a problem in Iowa called the emerald ash borer. And it's basically an invasive
Oh.
bug that
Yeah.
it starts from the outside of the tree and then it works its way to the core and it kills it. There's also
Yep.
an equivalent. I think it's like the South American boll weevil with palm trees here. But taking down a tree can be $2,000 to $25,000.
Surprisingly
in some cases.
expensive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very expensive. So
Yeah.
even though I didn't take much off the price, I said, if you guys take care of this for me, we're basically even and I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So that was sort of in my power and in my control, which was really nice.
That's good. You took down the trees. I mean,
Yeah.
especially old trees, potentially, if they're not sound, they could be a hazard to the house.
Yeah, I mean, there were power
Yeah.
lines on basically the house is on a corner, so power lines kind of went parallel to the street in front of the house, but also behind it. And one of them, if it would have fallen a certain way once it died and got pretty, brittle, it could have fell on the power lines, but also onto the actual house or my
those
neighbor's
trees had
house.
to go.
Yeah,
Those trees had
they
to
were
go.
they were a huge liability at that
Oh my
point. So I
gosh.
said, let's get rid of it, but I'm not going to pay for it, so I'm going to put it into the
That's
offer.
good.
But I think they anticipated that because they knew that they were dead. And basically every other house during that summer across rural Iowa had a big pile of mulch in the front because they had to hire somebody to cut down the trees. So it spread like wildfire throughout the entire state and other states too, I think. But they knew it was a problem, so I didn't really have to do much back and forth.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
So The house wasn't bought sight unseen. Did you see inside the property before you bought it, like the condition of the interior? And tell
I
me a
looked
bit.
at it once, so I ended up doing it a second time, but sort
Have
of
you
assessed.
moved to Iowa at this point, or are you shopping for this from DC?
I actually lived with my parents for a while, so I
Okay.
didn't have to sign a lease. I spent about a month
Yeah.
or two with them, which was really nice, sort of took the pressure off.
Yeah.
And they were also kind of along for the ride with me, so they would go to the properties and take a look.
So they're kind of like helping you for this.
Yeah,
That's good. That's a
definitely.
lot.
And sort of point out, like,
Yeah.
oh, I think this would be a mistake. You shouldn't go with this one. I
Yeah.
mean, I looked at a house in Ames, which would have been pretty desirable because it was super close to the university and
Yep.
probably it was higher in value, but I would have not had as much capital to work on renovations and probably wouldn't have made as much. But there was a house I looked at that actually like smelled like cat urine. And cat urine is like cigarette smoke. You can't get rid
Yeah.
of the smell. And that's one of the things that you have to consider that you can't change.
Yeah.
In some cases, there was
Yeah.
exposed electrical wiring or issues with the trusses in the attic that I would have had to spend thousands of dollars to repair. There were houses
We
that...
also, you never want to hear the F word.
What's that?
What's the F word?
Flood?
Flood? That's
Yeah,
a good F word.
I was going to bring that up.
What's the other F word?
Not sure.
Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
Foundation.
Definitely. Well, that was one thing that was really nice and solid with the house that I bought, but there were a couple properties I looked at that were technically not in a floodplain, but the backyard sloped toward the back of the house into like an egress window,
Oh,
and I
no.
said, okay, it probably has had a history of flooding, and sure enough, if you go in the basement, you can smell it,
And
essentially.
this isn't California. This is
Right.
Iowa where it actually rains.
Yeah, and we have four
So-
seasons, which is something you have
That's
to
right.
consider. So, but the house I bought was on, pretty flat foundation. There was no signs of leaking. It had been reinforced with extra beams. Actually, they paid money to do that, and so there was no sort of structural integrity issues. And I think if the bones of the home are good, you can do anything to improve the aesthetic and give it a facelift, and that doesn't require as much money. So that's what I was looking for, pretty much.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Yeah.
So then that was your primary, like, were you living in it when you fixed it up? How do you go about doing all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that I was able to renovate it so quickly is because I did live inside of it, and I also wanted to make sure that I owned
How
it.
fun was that?
Well, it was just me, so I wasn't raising, children and having pets around, and if it was a mess for 5 days on end, I mean, I was the only one that had to deal with it, so it wasn't that bad, but I pretty much started right away. Once I got in, after I closed, I moved in some of my furniture, but I tried to keep it pretty empty, and the first thing I did was start painting everything.
So
There's
you didn't go
probably-
down to the studs for much or anything?
No, I mean, I
Okay.
didn't have to really gut anything. I
Okay.
didn't have to add any rooms or, areas to the house. I didn't have to take down any walls, which is, I think, where the dollar signs start to rack up.
That's where they
So
start. Yeah.
I had a really good, essentially, canvas to start with.
Got
and
it.
literally took, paintbrush to wall and just started lightening up, improving the space. There was wallpaper, which was a doozy
That's
to
gotta
take
go.
off. It wasn't the kind that fully covers the wall, but it was a strip that went around.
Oh,
like halfway up.
yes. Yeah.
And you have to get this scoring tool. What I first did is I would basically spray vinegar water
Oh,
on
you're
it to
doing all this
soften it up.
yourself?
Oh, yeah, most of it. My
Okay.
parents helped me a little bit with...
Okay.
My dad's pretty good with electrical work, so I was able to get his help on that, some plumbing work, but most of the aesthetic work and cosmetic upgrades was me. So, had to take down the wallpaper, had to get everything primed up, and I probably spent a couple months just painting alone. Not just the walls, but also the baseboards, which is a super, I think, precise job that you have to do. I mean, you can't
Yeah.
just slop it on there.
No.
My mom
You got to
helps
tape
me.
it. You got to put the paper
Yeah.
all right. It's the whole thing.
Yeah. And luckily, I went over the old
I've done a
floor.
couple of these. And
Yeah. I went over the old floor so I could kind of be messy and not worry about getting paint on the floor because I was going to end up covering it up, which was nice. I actually did a vinyl plank material for the flooring.
Oh, nice. LVP.
Yeah, and it looks really sharp. I wanted to do something that was a little more durable and easier to clean because I knew I'd probably rent it out someday. And people would probably cringe to know that I went over hardwood, but when I, calculated the costs, it probably would have been just as much to refinish the hardwood as it would to install
I mean, I
new
cringe
flooring.
a little bit,
So
but you made it a rental eventually, so I'll give you.
yeah. But it was kind of a challenge with installing the floor because, like a lot of flooring that you buy, it's a lock and snap method.
Yep.
And you basically have to buy like 30% more material than you need to account
Yep.
for some of the planks being broken.
You have to
And
have
it's,
overage.
yeah,
Yes.
it's sort of a margin for error that you have
Yep.
to calculate for, but I ended up using a lot of the excess. I didn't think I'd have to actually work through the extra material that I worked through, but I returned some and got my money back. But that was tough because when you're using a saw in, sub-zero weather in Iowa, going back and forth inside and outside of the house all the time, it gets pretty brutal after a while. So that was really tough. But you also have to cut around, doorways and trim, and it can get super intricate. So,
Yeah.
but it's all worth it. I mean, it actually made the space look a lot bigger, which was super advantageous, I think. And it's a lot easier to clean. So if people, do rent and have pets or just even tracking in the snow during the winter, it's just way easier to manage.
Yep.
But that was probably the hardest part of the renovation.
The flooring.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you did that yourself again.
Me and my mom. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, all by herself. So
That's impressive.
the only main thing I really hired out was, and I factored this into my price when I offered money on the house, but it didn't have central air. But it did have a furnace and
had a
all the
furnace.
ductwork.
Okay,
So
yeah.
basically, the infrastructure was there for an
You just had to
HVAC.
add, what is it, evaporator coils to the stack or something, right?
Yeah, a little bit of modifications to the ventilation system
Yeah.
that was there because it was pretty old. And then the AC unit outside. But that was about a 2-day job, and it was pretty expensive. But that's the type of, I think, functional improvement that you're always going to get your return on investment with, because certainly in Iowa and humid climates, I mean, that's a bare essential. That's an expectation, is that you have central air. But it's also an investment I made that I know is going to add directly to the value almost instantaneously. Whereas if you're doing things like, putting a gold toilet into your bathroom or things that are,
I mean, I know one person who would do that, but
yeah, you're not going to get, your money's worth on those types of decisions. So,
buying things from Home Depot and painting them gold.
yeah.
Anyways, wow, that's awesome. So that was your like residence for a bit, and because you thought, okay, you're working at Barn Tools now, and like this is gonna be my house. I'm gonna find some nice Iowa boy.
Yeah.
So how did that then transition? You're like, at some point you moved before you rented this out.
Right. So my main goal was to actually enjoy the hard work that I did. So I ended up living in it for about 2 years, but obviously 2 years probably rings a bell for people, because if you sell your house before 2 years, typically you pay taxes on capital gains. So
Yep.
I knew, okay, I'm going to sit here, be in this house, enjoy the work, be close to my family and friends. But I knew that I wanted to eventually move on. So I decided I wanted to transition to San Diego just for the lifestyle primarily, and had started to entertain the possibility of getting into real estate someday, and kind of knew that that was the exact zip code and region that I should be in to really kick things off. So I ended up renting it out and felt like it was in a really good position when I had left. Sometimes people hurry up and flip a house and they try to get it in renting condition. There's still a lot of loose ends to tie up, maybe some additional renovations because it hasn't really been tested by somebody living in it. So I felt, fully confident about that and was able to sort of leave it and have peace of mind. And also I have family there.
I was going to say your parents are right there.
Right. So, I mean, property management companies were certainly something I had entertained and considered, but honestly, if it wasn't for my family and having people there that I can trust, I probably would have had to go down that avenue. So I'm definitely in a very unusual, probably advantageous position, but I'm 1,500 miles away now. If I didn't have eyes on my property, I would be totally out on my own and have no help. So that's where, brands like you come in to sort of be a trusted partner, but also dedicating all of your energy toward sort of being the safeguard for the property.
Yeah. I just had to deliver a notice on a tenant's door this morning, but luckily I live 10 minutes away. The house was in Oceanside. I live in Carlsbad. So that's the advantage of having a property manager who's right there.
Right.
So we have agents, me here in San Diego County. I have an agent in Orange County, agent in Los Angeles County. And so we have multifamily units next to the University of Southern California. My agent up there lives 15 minutes away without traffic in Culver City. He's over there whenever he needs to be.
Nice. Yeah.
And so like you said, if you didn't have your family there,
I'd be left out for the wolves. I would have no help. So yeah, that's difficult. And there might be a situation someday where they're not there anymore, and I don't have the oversight that I can enjoy today. So I would probably have to look into having an intermediary sort of manage the property for me. But right now, I feel pretty fortunate. I don't have to necessarily worry about that right now.
And so what sort of things do you think you'd look for if let's say one day you had to use a property manager?
I would probably look for someone who is very detail oriented and also has a strong appreciation for the house in a unique sense. Like, oh, it's not just another house that I'm adding to my roster here. I mean, they really have an appreciation for the amount of energy and effort that went into making the house what it is. And also really realize that all the blood and sweat that went into renovating the home is not something that should just be, swept away and sort of underappreciated because, there was part of me that didn't even want to rent my property because I knew that it might get destroyed by somebody and totally undo all of my hard work.
Yeah.
So I think
especially
that's really
when
important.
you were the person literally putting in the new vinyl
Right.
plank floorboards. You painted these things.
Yeah.
It wasn't just someone you paid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of the concept of the IKEA effect, where if you put something together on your own, you tend to appreciate it more and also place a higher value on whatever the thing is. And so,
Of course, you found the term that actually describes
yeah.
this.
Well,
I was just saying
together
you
a
made
lot.
the thing and you like it more because of that. You're
Yeah, I
right.
do. But that can also work in the wrong direction because some people are like, oh, I did all this work to this house. I'm going to ask for a price that's totally out of the ballpark of what it
I think
should
it works
be
for my
and,
cooking sometimes.
inflate
Maybe
things. Yeah.
I made such a great dish that was so good.
Yeah. You'll have to get a second opinion on it for sure. But
That's right.
yeah. So anyway, I would probably look for that, and also someone who's super responsive and not just, obviously communication is key in a property management tenant relationship. And it's essentially like being on call. I mean, you have to have someone who has a proven track record of being successful on that too. So I'm sure it was hard for you to start out because you were starting with nothing and you had to convince people that you were some sort of authority figure that they could trust. But I'm sure that was somewhat difficult for you to prove.
That's been kind of the biggest challenge. So a little bit about my background. So I'm Tyler Collins. I'm the chief broker of Palomar Oaks Property Management. And so I got my start in real estate around 2020. And that's when I started buying my own properties. This is, as we just talked about, interest rates were low. I got a couple of properties in Orange County and San Diego for around 3% interest rates. And so I was looking into hiring a property management company, but this seemed like something with my skill set. So, some people could be intimidated by working with tenants or afraid physically for their safety. I'm a fairly big guy. I go to the gym a lot, and I wasn't intimidated by it. I'm not afraid of confrontation. And I felt like I had a pretty good way of handling interpersonal issues and resolving things. And I'm pretty smart and I could work hard and look things up. And so I bought the properties, and some of them already came with tenants. There was an owner who was selling to me another owner. Some of them didn't. I had to find new tenants. But over time, I learned and went through the process of managing all these myself, dealing with the calls in the night about the toilet not working,
Yeah.
finding, vetting contractors, bidding, doing whole remodels. I've done remodels on several of the condos that I had. One of them was a brand new kitchen. Basically, we took everything out, put in nice farm sink that actually we found on discount. So doing things well, but at an appropriate price for the area. So,
Yeah, it's a big undertaking for sure.
yeah, it is a big undertaking. So what do you think were some of the most, because you've now been managing this property like yourself with your family. You have tenants.
Yeah.
Like, what have been some of the struggles that you've had doing this? Your time zones away. Like, who do the tenants call? Like, what's the setup here?
So, my family is usually the primary contact just because if they called me, I could probably help them, but only to a limited extent because I can't run over to the property and, even for my parents, if something happens and it's December or January and there's 6 inches of snow on the ground, they're not going to be able to
That's an Iowa problem.
potentially get over. And it actually did snow over Thanksgiving, which is super unusual. And a lot of people couldn't even leave their home for the holidays.
Yep.
So you have to account for other factors. But even if we take it to, Southern California, sometimes, there's issues with traffic and there's an emergency and, you might be sitting on the 5 for an hour and a half and, they're angry at you because they're like, why aren't you here? But these are real life circumstances that you have to account for in your approach. And I think if you have kind of the professional acumen and the patience and, I guess reputation established with the person, it sort of mitigates some of those challenges. But I think, tenants also have to have some grace and understanding that a lot of property managers are really working as hard as they can, and they don't necessarily have all the resources at their disposal to, be punctual and prompt and have the answer to every question, especially if they're just starting out. So that can be really challenging. But like I said, I'm almost 2,000 miles away. If I didn't have contacts on the ground where my house is, I would be completely out of luck. So there might be a point in the next year or two where I have to adjust that and find, someone, but
Yeah.
I probably can't hire you. I don't know. You're not physically there,
I'm a little
but
far.
maybe you can give me a referral or something. We
Yeah.
can work out an arrangement.
Yeah,
But,
definitely. Definitely. So you were very selective with your tenants, and what are some of the ways that you screen them?
So I try not to do any marketing through Facebook. I like to do referral only selection, essentially, just because it's a little bit more trusted. And obviously, I have to be a lot more considerate of that since I am living so far away, even though I have people on the ground helping me.
Yeah.
It's just an extra added precaution and measure that I really need to consider when I'm choosing the right person. And obviously, I'm from Iowa, so I have a lot of connections there, a lot of family and friends, and I have a lot of people that I can trust that are going to give me information with integrity and honesty.
That's
which
the
is
most
super
important thing.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
the
not
most
just going to
important
go
thing.
out cold and say, oh, yeah, this person can live here. I've never met them.
Yeah.
That's too much of a liability on my shoulders, and I don't really want to deal with the onus of that.
Yeah, that is a big onus. That's a great thing that you have that, you grew up there in Iowa and you know a lot of these communities and you can find someone who's trustworthy to rent a place. That's vetting tenants is one of the biggest challenges. You could have a tenant who's on paper, everything looks fine, even their credit score is good.
Yeah.
But they could, from the get-go, be planning not to pay you any rent.
Right.
Have you ever heard of the term professional tenant?
I haven't, but I could probably infer what it might mean. But
What do you
go
think?
ahead.
What do you think a professional tenant is?
Probably someone who maybe has a proven track record of renting properties in the past, so they have sort of a resume showing that they made rent on
Opposite.
previous properties.
Opposite.
Okay.
So a professional tenant.
Or would it be con artists? Maybe that's more
There
the
we go.
direction you're
That's
going.
that's
Yeah.
what I'm going. So a professional tenant is someone who understands the laws, and particularly in Iowa, a little bit less so, but in states like New York and California, in Oregon and Washington are particularly susceptible to professional tenants because there's a lot of laws that protect tenants, and they're not always used like this, but they can be used maliciously. And for small time landlords, it's a massive headache and it's a financial black hole. There are stories, this is especially during COVID, like in Los Angeles, they shut down eviction proceedings essentially. There was the backlog in the courts. And so essentially you weren't able to evict tenants. And due to COVID protections, hardship things, people would say, you couldn't evict anyone.
It was a
and
free for all. Yeah.
the small time landlords are losing their shirts. And so that's one of the things you have to be really careful about in California, which is why you want a property manager, because it's the property manager's job as a professional licensed real estate agent
Yeah.
to understand all these
Totally.
and to know what you're getting into. So
Yeah, and so I live in La Jolla, which is a part of San Diego here, and I actually live in an ADU. So basically my landlord is on the property.
yeah,
He actually converted his one-car garage into a studio, which is super nice, and then he has a unit above that too. But anytime there's a problem, especially maintenance wise or even, noise related issues, he's right there, super responsive.
That's great.
And I mean, I'd love to get your take on kind of where you see the direction of those going, since they seem to be really taking off in Southern California. And obviously, there's a lot of incentive as a homeowner to use it as an added income stream. And in the case of my landlord, he has 2 ADUs on his property. So, I mean, in terms of responsiveness, I never have to worry because he's already on the premises. But, I feel like that's a space that's super opportunistic right now. And a lot of people are starting to talk about it more.
Yeah, the ADU boom is a big thing, especially California has been rolling out things that cities have to have designated pre-approved plans, like a set of plans. And so if a mom or a grandma wants to put like a nice little ADU in her backyard, in theory, like the ideal sort of situation is maybe she rents that to her son or some cousins or something. One of the things that has a negative impact on neighborhoods, and particularly in San Diego, you've seen this, is that people will take advantage, and these ADUs, especially on linked properties, they become more like apartment complexes.
Yeah.
Which more housing is great for me, the realtor and the property manager, because I get to manage more things. But we do have to be aware there is a negative impact on the community from some of this development.
Right.
But I think what an ADU was really pitched as, and what I think it is good as, is someone has a single family home with a nice big backyard. They can build a proper structure that doesn't obstruct the neighborhood, doesn't cause a lot of traffic, and they can rent it to family members who might be looking for a cheaper place to rent in this really expensive housing market.
Totally.
So,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, but ADUs are great if you're a small-time landlord. I shouldn't say landlord. If you're a homeowner and you're looking for a way to get into the property market, if you could buy a property rental separate from your house, or you could build an ADU on your house.
Yeah, totally.
In some ways, I think an ADU on the house is one of the best courses of action. You're going to add value to the house, most likely, because you've added another livable, properly permitted structure that's extra living space. And this can be kind of your first foray into really managing a property or having someone manage it for you and collecting that rental income.
Totally.
So,
and it makes a lot of sense for my landlord because they're basically retired at this point, and so they don't need much of their house anymore. They sort of have no purpose for it. So financially, it makes a lot of sense for them, and it also gives them additional financial security. So it's almost a natural next step over the course of your life to add that investment down the line, for sure.
Yep. They used to call them granny flats back in the day. That was the old term.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's a fun one.
So let's see. So you moved to San Diego, and then you worked for a marketing firm, and you're still working for a marketing firm. Is that correct?
So I'm actually back with Barn Tools. It's interesting.
Okay.
So when I moved out here, I was actually with an AI startup based in the Silicon Valley. And that was a remote job that I was able to do from anywhere.
It was a marketing job for an AI company.
Yes, exactly. And it was also a startup. So again, they had about 30 or 40 people. Yeah. And it was full time. But once I was pretty serious about the real estate endeavor, I wanted to transition to a job that gave me the flexibility to study for the licensing exam. But even more important than that, have
So you were
time.
thinking about this real estate licensing as you're working like years ago.
Yeah, it sort of cropped up in my mind, but once I got to San Diego and sort of the cards started to align for me, I thought, okay, I'm actually on a runway to potentially make this happen. And of course, it's a long game. It takes years to build your brand and your reputation and get the acumen to do it. But I knew that I couldn't continue to work full time, essentially. And so now I'm in a consultancy capacity for one of my former employers. And I kind of think that's a testament to my reputation and my work ethic, is that the last 3 jobs I've had, I did not apply for. They came to me and wanted me to work for them. And, if you leave those doors open, you'd be pretty surprised at how much that really pays off for you and the dividends
You leave
that
those
you really
barn
get
doors
from it.
open.
Exactly, yeah. So I'm able to work a more flexible schedule, but more importantly than studying, I'm also able to network and sort of start establishing connections with potential mentors, but also brokers that could sponsor me in the future that have been in the industry maybe 10 plus years who have obviously seen a lot, including a lot of fluctuation in the market. But it's mostly just a fun ride for me. I mean, I feel like you can either choose to be miserable and approach real estate with a lot of pressure on your shoulders and a lot of, almost unrealistic expectations on the pace that you're going to move. But I've sort of chose the side of having more patience and enjoyment because this is, like I said, a long game. It takes several years to get established in real estate. And if you decide that you're just going to, suffer and think that it's super hard and unattainable, you're not going to enjoy it. And I feel like life is just too fleeting and precious and short to adopt that, other mindset. So I've only been about 2 months into this entire endeavor, but it's already been really rewarding for me. I've met a lot of really interesting people, a lot of people that are potentially interested in having my help with some of their marketing on the real estate side, which would be a good way for me to build my portfolio and sort of get an inside look in real estate without having to actively be an agent yet and kind of go under the wing of a broker potentially, which I think is a good way to learn, on the spot.
Yeah.
But it's been a really fun ride, and I feel like that's just the attitude that I'm going to adopt because it's going to be a lot more pleasant and enjoyable and also memorable that way.
Yeah, I think that's good. And you also are in the position where you have that consultancy job.
Yeah.
So you're not, because some agents, they'll get their license and then that's it. They're going to start doing that. And their bank account is going dry while they're trying to get that first commission check.
Yeah.
That's very stressful.
Like we were saying earlier, I mean, real estate is not something that you can really bet on because it is so unpredictable. And if you're putting all your eggs into the real estate basket and you don't have another income stream, even if it's just a rental property, you might very easily run out of money. And a lot of agents I've met who have been pretty well seasoned just because of the nature of the market have not sold in over 2 years in some cases. And so I don't want to say I'm tempering my expectations, but I'm trying to be more pragmatic and realistic and understand that no matter how hard you work in real estate, a lot of times things don't materialize overnight. Yeah. It's not necessarily directly reciprocal where I'm going to meet all these people and do all these great things and try to stand out. And then, magically I'm going to sell a house in a week. That's just not the nature of things. You're kind of at the whims of market volatility, but also what's happening in the economy. And, it takes a long time to build relationships. And that's, I think, what your success in real estate is predicated on is having good connections with people. Yeah. I mean, you can get referrals and in very rare cases, cold calls from people that want you to represent them, but ultimately it's through your own personal inner circles. And you can kind of see already the people that I've interacted with who approach that disingenuously and then in kind of a transactional way. And then the people that are just wanting to make new
you're
friends
gonna see a
and
lot
kind
of
of be
that.
social.
Well, I mean, you were in politics, so this is nothing new to you.
Yeah, sort of like some of it's kind of embellished and gilded, and you can sort of see through it. But I feel like
I was going to say,
like,
a marketing and politics background, I think you're very well prepared for dealing with.
I think so. Yeah.
Have you watched Selling Sunset?
I have. I try not to. I try to suppress that from my mind because I know that's not representative of maybe reality to some extent for people, but that's not really the path I want to go down. But it's interesting. There's an Oppenheim Group office in La Jolla, and you never know. I might, contact them someday or sort of start to get to know them, which would be pretty neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was funny. You were talking earlier about you're very even keel and you keep persisting at things. Mm-hmm. I was thinking, boy, that really is the opposite of some of those agents on Selling Sunset.
Yeah, definitely.
It is all about
a little more haphazard, more, wrapped up in personal drama and self-interest. And that's another thing too, is a lot of salespeople like to talk a lot and like to not necessarily follow through with action or, proven success when they're representing people. And I feel like the number one skill you need to have is being a good listener. And I think there's maybe a ratio of like you should listen 80% of the time, talk 20% of the time. If you're in a meeting and you don't have anything valuable to say, don't say it at all. And there's actually like a quote from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible that I recently learned about. And it says, "A fool's voice is known by his many words."
Yeah.
Sort of like alluding to the idea that people that talk a lot are sometimes insecure and trying to project things, but also they feel like filling the room with their own noise and their own, thoughts is somehow adding value. And that's not necessarily what your, client is expecting from you. And if you're
Yes.
talking
Yeah.
so much that you don't understand the needs of your client, then you're probably not going to get referrals. You're probably not going to succeed in that immediate deal, and that's going to tank your reputation. So
I think what you're bringing up is one of the most important things, and I've been learning this: the needs of the client. Because people have an image of salespeople that they're these loud, big smile. I have the big car here. Come look
Yeah.
at the car. But ultimately, what is it? The goal of a salesperson is to fulfill the need of the client. And so, in order to do that, the salesperson has to discover the need. If you have a product and there is a prospect, what is the need of the product for the client? So if you're just talking, and not listening, then you're not seeing what the client's needs are.
exactly. Or, it's not just about translating their immediate need, but maybe if you listen to everything they have to say, you start to identify other needs that they might not even know they have. And so it makes you a lot more of a valuable representative and sort of liaison in, probably the biggest financial decision of someone's life. And if it's
Yeah.
their first time doing it, they want to work with someone that's trusted and has
Yeah.
a proven track record. And that's really important. I think it starts from listening to their needs, but also understanding, the value that you bring to them through your professional background too.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this interview. Are there any last words you'd like to say?
No, thanks so much for having me. I'm
Yeah.
super excited that I could kick things off with you, and I hope the podcast takes off, and really excited to follow all of your work.
Great. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for listening to the SoCal Property Playbook. Again, I'm your host, Tyler Collins of Palomar Oaks Property Management. If you'd like to hear more episodes just like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. You can also follow us at Palomar_Oaks on Instagram to see when the new episodes go live. We hope to see you again. Thanks.